Welcome to Pathway to Property, your go-to podcast for building a property portfolio and breaking down property markets.
And welcome back to the Pathway to Property podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Lachlan Vidler, and I'm joined, as always, from the very beginning by Clifford. Lukey, how are you, mate?
Doing all right, mate. In fact, I've been great.
Yeah?
I think I smashed my personal record for coffee this morning.
Interesting.
So productivity's through the roof.
Well, is it? If you're smashing your record, I'm more concerned that you're just sitting there drinking it rather than doing anything with it.
Nah, mate. Working after hours most of the time and through the weekends. So there's never any rest for the wicked, mate.
Well, and you are wicked, so there wouldn't be any rest for you above anyone else. But, mate, we're here for an awesome episode, How to Actually Retire Through Property. So we've got an awesome episode ahead, but I think I just want to kick it off by saying the episode that we did last episode with Jeremy, that response was the biggest response we've had off any episode ever. And I don't know if it's just because we had a guest speaker and people were happy to have somebody other than us, in the podcast studio. But that was crazy, hey?
Oh, mate. I think we had literally the day after that was released, I think we had 20 to 25 website inquiries just off the back of that episode alone.
Yeah. It's insane. Absolutely mind-blowing, insane. But I think it really goes to show, I know we had a blast doing it. Jeremy is, he's phenomenal at what he does, but I think more than anything, he's an amazing communicator, which he can take topics that are often very dry and boring and bland. Yeah. And he can almost make you feel excited about it.
That is true, man. That is true. No, it was great to have him on, and he's someone that has such a a solid reputation in the space. He's a very knowledgeable person, and like you said, he's got this ability to be able to simplify some very complex, boring topics into something that sounds really interesting. So, Jeremy, if you're listening, mate, thanks again for jumping on with us.
Well, maybe we'll have to have him back at some point after we finish off this first season of Pathway to Property. But matey, spring property, it's onto us, hey?
It is indeed.
It's I don't know about you, but from what I'm seeing around the place, it's we're not that far into spring. We are in spring, aren't we? June, July, August, and we're now into September. So I guess it's the start of spring. There's a lot of interest in the air getting around. I don't know if it's the fractionally better weather. I don't know if it's just that everyone thinks about spring property. So when it comes around, people are going, it's here, we got to get into it. But from people that we're obviously looking to, or that are looking to work with us, and then obviously on the property side, it's pretty hectic at the moment.
It's been a massive shift. I don't know, I can only speak on what's going on in Sydney because we obviously live here, but the last month or so, we were just getting torrential rain, and it was just horrible weather, doom and gloom. I just kind of feel like we've come out of that now finally, and the sentiment has shifted as a result. And I think there's a couple of other things that might have impacted that sentiment as well that we can kind of speak on in just a moment.
Are you setting me up?
I think I am. I'm spiking it up for you.
For the first home buyer stuff. I'm assuming that's what you're alluding to.
Potentially.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think that announcement took everybody by a little bit of surprise. So for anyone who's not aware of what we're talking about, there's the federal government 5% first home buyer scheme that allows people to get into properties with just a 5% deposit, and they don't have to worry about LMI. And one of the biggest issues with the scheme, as with most, and obviously it makes sense why it exists, is that there was obviously restrictions around it, and some of the biggest ones were just around income, so you had to sit below a threshold, and then you also had a property purchase price limit as well. But now, as of a couple of weeks ago, the government sort of came out with a bit of a shock for everyone, and they'd made some adjustments to the scheme, and the adjustments were meant to take place on the 1st of January, and that was going to involve removing the income limits for people. So it meant no matter what your income is, you could now be eligible for it, or at least that element of it, you'd be eligible. And they were going to significantly increase the price cap. So, for example, Sydney had a 900K limit and it was going to go up to, I think, 1.5 million, right? So there's different numbers across different areas. So that was meant to happen, I think, 1st of Jan, right? And then they've come out and they've said it's now going to start from October. So 3 months early, I think a lot of people weren't really prepared for that either. And I don't know, you just feel a little bit of a sense of change, right?
Yeah, definitely. And it was really interesting because obviously everyone was kind of waiting for like January. The big talk was around like, get in before January because that's when, people are really going to start to flood into the market. But with this news, like people are like, oh, I wish I kind of prepared a little bit earlier and we're getting my ducks in a row a bit sooner. So it's kind of interesting because we've been definitely getting a lot of inquiries from people being like, oh, how soon can you get us in?
Yeah.
So it's very, very
And obviously we see a different side because we don't do that owner-occupier stuff. We don't do first home buyer stuff. But everyone who's sort of been talking to us about it or that we've been driving conversation with it, the flow-on repercussion of it is that now, so it's not like supply of properties is going up. If anything, it's probably getting harder still. But the demand side, which is obviously the amount of people in the market looking to go, that is going to increase, right? And it doesn't matter whether you're buying in the center of Sydney or you're buying in a regional city somewhere else. The cold hard facts are there are now going to be people who weren't previously eligible who are now eligible, and they're going to be coming into the market. So like let's call spade a spade. It's not like there's going to be less demand. It's like best case is there was no demand change, of which we're already in challenging circumstances. But I think the reality is that there's going to be an increase in demand. It's just a natural progression.
Yeah, well, mate, we're looking forward to seeing what comes off the back of all that influx of demand. In other news, talk to me, mate. What's going on with the TV show and everything like that? What's the latest on that? Budget
Battlers. So very, very excited. Obviously, going to be coming out prime time on Channel 9. From what I hear, we should be, we'll be in that prime time weekday time slot. But it's not my show. I don't control any of that. But from what I understand, that's what's happening.
Can you give us a sneak peek?
Oh, can I give you a sneak peek? Oh, mate, we've
anything to look forward to, mate?
Well, we're still filming. And we've done a number of them now. I won't tell you how many episodes we've filmed, but we've done a number of them now. There's still a few to go. It's crazy. It's crazy. Like to see the value increase that's sort of come from these homes, from the advice that I've been able to give into it, has been just incredible. And I think most importantly, what that translates into for these people are they've got beautiful, updated homes, but they've also got, some equity uplift and they've got their wealth growing. And, obviously I'm on the tools when I'm there as well when we go and film because, premises show 5 days to reno a house. So when I'm there, I'm on the tools as well. So it's a really nice sort of full circle with it because you see the start, you work really hard through the week, making improvements to the home. Obviously for me, compared to other people on the show, giving that advice into what strategic improvements we can make to really try to get bang for buck.
Yeah.
And then seeing that final product, it's pretty cool.
Oh, mate, it'd be fulfilling for sure.
It is. And the stories behind the homes, and I definitely can't share that at the moment. But when the episodes come out and it premieres everything, some of the stories just really incredible.
Looking forward to tuning in. When's it go to air again?
Still before the end of the year. I'm not sure if they're really talking about premiere dates yet, but it will be out before the end of the year, which is exciting.
Very cool.
Hopefully sooner rather than later. It's one of those things, you do all the hard work.
Yeah.
And you don't get to see it until months later. So I'm hoping it's going to be out soon because it's going to be cool.
All right, mate, let's jump into the episode. So this episode is all about how to retire through property. So do you kind of want to give us a little bit of a rundown on what this episode is going to be all about for our listeners?
Absolutely, mate. We've got something I think very exciting, right? Everyone knows from when we just kicked off the episode, we're going to be talking about how to retire through property. But for me, I think this is a really exciting episode because as everybody would know, this is what we've been building to all year long on this podcast, right? And it was by design. When you and I sat down to plan out what it is that we wanted to talk about, what we really wanted to do is give people that Bible if they didn't know how to start investing in property, how to go from the very beginning of it all the way through to the very end. And the very end is that retirement, right? That's the whole purpose behind investing in anything, right? So, we look back, we think about things like the goal setting, we think about things like creating your team, we think about things like the planning stages, we think about things like how to analyze markets.
The structuring side.
Side, right, with Jeremy, which was exceptional. we think about all those episodes that we've gone through, and it leads us here to this moment, which is about where does it all culminate, right? How can you, as Luke Clifford, who works a job, who has dreams of retirement and wants to use property as his vehicle to get there, how can you as Luke Clifford do that? How can you achieve that, right?
Yeah.
Do you know?
Tell me, mate. Talk to me.
So, and I think the reason why this is an awesome episode is because this takes everything and pulls it together. Because I know you've told me, and I'd love it if you could share any comments you have with everybody about it. But I know how often I have this conversation, and I know that you would have it a lot more than me these days.
Yeah.
Around people who sit there at the start of their journey and they're going, I understand that by owning property, it will help me to retire. It'll either help me to retire or it will retire me.
Yeah.
But I'm really struggling to see and understand the link between acquiring property and how that actually translates into retirement.
Yeah. No, and I definitely think a lot of people actually shy away from jumping into something when they don't know what it's actually going to lead to. So something that we talk about when we're speaking to clients is what that portfolio planning journey looks like and how it ties into everything. So here at Atlas, we like to break it up into a few different phases. So we've got the foundational phase, we've got the acceleration phase, and then Lockie, finish the last one off for me.
Retirement, baby. Retirement phase.
Baby. So with the foundational phase, we're typically looking at acquiring properties that offer that blend of both capital growth and cash flow. And it's often established residential houses, properties that have, a really solid amount of land, the building itself structurally very sound. But the big reason why we need to achieve that balance of capital growth and cash flow at that phase is because we need the capital growth, so we don't need to rely on savings for future deposits, but we do need to blend it out really, really nicely with the cash flow as well to look favorable to the banks for future lending. Now, once we've built out the foundations nicely, we can then start to branch off and look at asset types that are more focused towards the cash flow dynamic, like your commercials, like your duplexes, like your triplexes, block of units, things like that. But for us, it's all about getting the order of our purchases done in the right sequence. Like I know you, Lockie, you're a massive, massive advocate, of commercial property, but it's really about explaining to clients that it's about acquiring that asset at the right stage of the journey for you. Because I remember we've had multiple clients that have bought commercial property really early on in the journey. And although it looks really, really attractive from a cash flow perspective, you're inherently taking on a lot more risk with things like commercial assets, with vacancy rates being a lot higher, but also the capital growth rates typically not being as strong as established resi, right? So, you might have a commercial property that's putting a couple of $100 in your pocket every week, but if you're not seeing that beneficial growth on the other side, it can slow things down in terms of expanding as efficiently as possible.
Absolutely. I think you've really summarized it well. And we did a whole episode on this as well. But like you said, there are pros and cons to both. And as you said, we've seen people who've gone down the route of trying to take your acceleration properties before building out a foundation.
Yeah.
And one of the other, really big sides that goes along with that is that one of the biggest benefits of property is leverage, right? You're able to put a small amount of money in, borrow the rest. That asset, that property then goes up, and the return you're getting might even outstrip what you've had to actually put into it, even in your first year. But one of the other things that comes with something like, say, commercial property is that when you're doing that, you have to put in bigger deposits. So not only does it take you longer to save that amount, especially if you don't have other properties, but you're taking a bigger chunk out that you could be utilizing for other things like other residential property, which at the right stage of your journey is incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
But by doing it in the wrong order, you can then really set yourself up for this position where you might own some assets, like you said, maybe a couple $100 in your pocket, but you're not really running your portfolio as efficiently as you could be to scale you there, right?
Yeah.
So that's why it is so important to obviously sequence your portfolio correctly, having that plan, all the other things we're talking about in the episodes, but you need to make sure it's set up correctly from the start, because it's not that you're going to have a horrible life, but the thing is that it might really stress you and really push you to your limits a lot more than if you had have done it right from the start.
It's interesting. It's kind of like, you buy any property in Australia, obviously within reason, and any asset type as well, if you hold that property long enough, you're very, very likely going to make money. But it's all about understanding what that opportunity cost is. And if you had a crystal ball and you could be like, if I went down this path versus this path, and you could see that there was a massive, massive difference, you'd obviously deter from going down that way where you wouldn't get the best financial outcome. So that's why it's important that you have a proper strategy in place so you know what your next 3, 4, 5 moves are after that next one.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's jump into it. I think now is the perfect way to segue into what we're going to do today, which is we're going to actually deep dive 3 different types of scenarios. We're going to analyze them down. We're going to give you as the listener all the numbers that we're working off so that way you can follow along. And we're going to show you the 3 most common ways that people retire through property. And we're going to do that through a case study example so that way you can see how the same set of circumstances can yield 3 very different sets of results, right? So to start it off, right, the 3 most common ways that you can retire through property are you buy and hold, you sell everything off, or you do a combination of the 2, right? Realistically, they are the only 3 ways, right? I always hate using absolutes like only, but I'm sure you saw my face when I said. But realistically, that's typically the only 3. Just through vanilla property investment. We're not talking about development or anything like that. Through sort of passive property investment, that's your only 3 real choices, right? Buy and hold, sell it all off, or a combination, right? So to take you through, I guess. I'm sure everyone who's just heard that understands what each one is, but there's some pros and cons that go along with each one, right? So for example, buy and hold. Typically that is going to be a longer route, typically, right? But when you get to that level of performance in the portfolio that allows you to retire, you are going to get to retire with all of your assets, right? So from a generational wealth point of view, it is probably the most powerful way to do it, right? Doesn't mean you can't ever sell throughout your journey, but I think we're talking about selling at the twilight of that to sort of finish off the portfolio, right? Not on your journey as you're going, because as you know, if you've got a lemon or you've got something that's not performing, you've got something that you've had, it's done all right, but you for whatever reason don't believe you're going to get much for the next 10 years, you very well might be needing to divest that asset now, right? But we're talking about buy and hold of the portfolio you're going to take, to the deathbed, basically. Right? Not to get morbid, right? That's basically what we're talking about, right? So ideal for that generational wealth sort of transfer and setting up your family and all the rest, right? We then get you to your sell-off, right? Which is where you buy whatever properties you're going to buy that fits your plan. And then as you're getting to your retirement level, you then sell it all and you pocket the cash and then you go and do whatever you need to with the cash. But that's your nest egg there, right? Now, this route can typically be a little bit faster, right? So you get that benefit. However, you don't have any assets left over at that point. Yes, you got the money, but you're effectively intending to spend that money to retire. So you lose that generational asset aspect. If you live longer than what you planned with that money, right, you may actually outlive your money, which, if you're 85, 90, 95 and you're running out of money and you're going on the pension, I'll tell you what, if that was me at that age, they're the last years I want to be on the pension, right? I'd rather be like 60 to 65 on the pension.
You're happy and sad. It's like you're happy you haven't carked it yet. You still got years left. But
or some
the
people,
quality of life.
Oh, mate, So
straggling along.
So that's the sell-off, right?
Yeah.
Pretty self-explanatory. But one of the biggest issues that comes with it is you're losing that asset base. You are losing it, right? And then you have the combination, right? And the combination, depending on how you do it, it could actually be as fast as the sell-off, but it typically sits somewhere in between the time frame of a sell-off versus a buy and hold, right? And that's because, you're going to keep some, you're going to pay down debt, you're going to be replacing income, you're going to be freeing up. Realistically, most property portfolios, the biggest expense is your debt. So if you are selling off assets to clear some of that debt, it will increase your cash flow side as well. But you are still losing some assets. You're still then reducing your ability to continue scaling, especially if, and as we'll find out in the scenario today, you're at an age where you're still quite young when you could be in a position to retire. You could make life more difficult for yourself, right?
Yeah.
You could, right? Hypothetically. So each of them have their pros and cons. I would say neither is better or worse. It's about your circumstances. It's about what you want.
Yeah.
Right.
What you're working towards. So we've got a scenario here that we're going to run through, and effectively you're going to demonstrate to our listeners, how they could apply those different strategies. So the buy and hold, the sell down, everything, and then the combination across this one single scenario so people can kind of see the differences. So with this scenario, we've got clients that are 35 years old. They have a combined salary of about $350,000 per annum. They would like to retire at 55 and need about $125K per annum in today's dollars in order to do that.
Yeah.
Alrighty. So hand it over to you, mate.
Hand it over to me.
Crunch the numbers for us.
So the reason why, and I'll just give some color, the reason why we decided on this scenario is because I think that this is a scenario that a lot of people can see themselves in, right? And I'm not saying that 350K is a big or small amount of money, but 35-year-olds, you're starting to get towards your, the top end of your career. Or maybe not top end, but you're past the middle and you're starting to get that nice run up. A couple, right? Because at the end of the day, having two incomes does make a really, really big difference in this, right? And then let's be real as well. If you have a 100K income and you're a single income earner, it's not that you can't do this, but it's going to take longer and there's going to be other factors at play. So, we also wanted to add a little bit of realism into it, which is that, practically speaking, if you have a few dollars behind you, and these days, you think a 350K income, that's a household that's on, 150 and 200, right? Or 250 and 100. And of course, that means you must be doing all right for yourself. But I think the point is that we're not saying you need to be doctors or lawyers or all the rest. It's still that upper middle class type of person.
Yeah.
And if you're not in that bracket, you can still take something away from this, which is, how you could adjust it for yourself. Maybe the retirement income isn't 125, maybe it's 100, maybe your time frame is still 20, whatever it might be. So that was why we wanted to set it up this way.
Yeah.
All right.
Now, the way that you've modeled this out as well, do you want to kind of share with our listeners how we've gone about it? Because we're actually going to break down the numbers properly. So put your listening caps on.
Yep.
Like Lockie's going to break it down in terms of each acquisition's details.
Yeah, get your pen and paper ready.
Get the pen and paper ready. But before we do that, just explain to the listeners how we actually went about putting these numbers together.
Yeah, well, so first and foremost, as Lukey went through before, we have the portfolio building process, right? Of your foundation, your acceleration, and then your retirement, right? So in the foundation, Lukey's already explained it, but we're typically looking at houses in this sort of bucket, right? And then once we move to the acceleration, we're looking at sort of those more income producing assets, like you mentioned, like commercials, duplexes, triplexes, triplexes, unit blocks, that sort of thing, right? So we've modeled that for these different scenarios, right? Where you have to start with your foundation and move all the way through. And the coolest part of it is that we've actually used our own portfolio modeling software. So, I'm sure people out there know of different platforms you can do things on, but over at Atlas, we've actually invested, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and we've actually built out our own property portfolio modeling platform. And it's incredible because we own that technology. We can make those adjustments. So we don't have to be reliant on somebody else's platform or software. We can make those changes ourselves. So it makes it really powerful when we're doing things like this because we can knock up all these scenarios. We can make the adjustments we need, and it sits within our system, same as all of our clients' portfolio plans. And the level of accuracy is absolutely insane. So that's how we've gone about doing it.
All right, let's kick it off with the buy and hold approach.
Okay. All right. So as we know, clients are currently 35 and they want to be retired by 55. So we've got 20 years, right? And as we also know from what I was saying before, the buy and hold strategy is typically going to take a little bit longer because you're dealing with bigger debt levels. Maybe it's not even that much of a reduction in debt, right? Because you can actually build out these incomes and not even get rid of your debt, but it does lose value because of inflation over the years, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to kick off, and we've just to make it a little bit easier on ourselves, right? We've started off, and this is for all the scenarios, we've actually started off where we bought the first property earlier this year, right? Just from a maths point of view more than anything else, right? So we kick off with their first foundational property at $650K in January of this year, right? So that's their first foundational property. Now, when we've been doing this, we have taken into we've taken into account their borrowing. We've taken into account how we expect that their borrowing might change over time. We've chatted with, certain team members of ours to make sure it's got that level of accuracy. So this isn't just numbers on a page. This has been a real life scenario that we've tried to pull together, right? So we get that first property in January 2025 for $650,000, okay? Now, because of their savings and, they've obviously got a decent income as well, they don't spend a huge amount, but they don't stop themselves enjoying life as well. So they've got a very reasonable level of expenditure. They've got the borrowing power to go again, right? So we actually then end up buying their second property in October of this year, right? So next month, right? We're going to buy that next property also at $650K, okay? So they're going to finish 2025 with a 2-property portfolio. Now, that's not bad, right? But they're still sitting, they're at the upper end, but they're still sitting in that upper bracket of people, 91% own 1 or 2 properties. So right now, they're still at that cusp. They haven't quite ticked over into, that really strong property investment level yet, but that's going to come, okay? Yep. So we now need to let time do its thing, compound out the properties. They've obviously got to save again, and we want to see their borrowing increase. So we're going to fast forward 4 years now, 4 years to 2029, right? In 2029, that's when they're going to get their third property. So for those of you sitting there thinking, oh, everyone spruiks on about how, we've got to buy 10 properties in 5 years and all these other things, right?
Yeah.
That's not the case. If you buy smart, you buy well, and you actually know how to plan out a portfolio, they're now gonna buy their third property for $700K in August of 2029. Okay. Now you can see a little bit of an uptick in price. We do also make adjustments on the back end. We're just trying to the numbers that we're giving are based in today's terms, right? Just to keep a bit of relativity about it. But we're going to buy it 4 years later for property number 3. Okay, that's going to be their third and their final foundational property, right? We then go on to their fourth and now final property for their whole portfolio, right? We're now going to throw in an acceleration property, okay? So we're going to look towards a commercial property for them. And that commercial property we're going to buy in August 2035, right? So 6 years after their third purchase and 10 years or more or less 10 years into their journey. So in 10 years, they've got 4 properties, which is not too bad. But like I said, it's certainly not the spruiker levels of, 10 properties in 5 years or whatever it might be, they're still, it's still not bad, right?
Yeah.
So we're going to buy that commercial property for them for $3 million, right? Which I'm sure you're thinking, it's not a small amount, right? Like, how are you going to fund that, right? Well, the thing is we've got 2 properties that have had 10 years of growth. Their incomes, we plan for at worst sort of inflationary increases because they're still not even at their peak earning potential. So by planning for just inflationary increases, that's going to account for any promotions, but it's still going to undercut it. So we're still actually being conservative.
Yeah.
Plus, we've then got a third property that's been there for 6 years. And then there's different types of mechanisms we can use with something like commercial property, where they may very well be able to go for what we call a full doc loan. But then there are other things that they might be able to do, like, for example, say a lease doc loan, where it's going to allow them to get into it, but they don't have to have the borrowing power for the full $3 million in a typical sense, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So these clients, very, very happy to just sit back. They knew that the 20 years was fine for them. They didn't want to go much harder. We could have bought more property, right? We're still only 10 years into this journey, but they're also a little bit more risk adverse. They don't need a lot, right?
Yeah.
And they're just happy to be where they're at. So we'd actually stop the portfolio at this point and we would just let it then compound out, right? We'd let it compound out for another 10 years. So by the time we get to year 20 in the buy and hold version of this analysis for how to retire through property, they would actually end up having $136,000 of income
in today's dollars.
Right? So we've actually gone 11K above what they needed to. So they actually hit it around year 19. So it's actually faster, right? But at that 20-year mark, 136K, right?
I mean, if you spoke to most investors, man, like especially like people that are like just jumping in, like if you could tell them that in 20 years' time by only acquiring 4 properties, they could be generating $136,000 in passive income in today's dollars.
Yeah,
I think they'd be pretty happy with that outcome.
Well, and then you get to double it by saying they've got a really strong equity position too. So they've got about 3.3 million in today's dollars of equity.
Yeah.
So if something did happen and they had to sell it all down, you're also going to net a pretty handy little sum of money, right? But I agree with you. Imagine that, right? 4 properties, nothing crazy, right?
Yeah.
Couple of properties sub $1 million, and then you get one bigger commercial asset down the road to help you out.
Yeah.
Right. So that's version 1, right? For these clients, a buy and hold type scenario. So you can see very achievable, very, very achievable. All you need to do is put the right pieces in place. But I can tell you, if we had to reverse that and they had gone for that commercial property first, they likely would have struggled to continue scaling and growing their portfolio, right?
And the reality is they wouldn't have been able to get the commercial anyway, very likely, just because they wouldn't have had the deposit amount.
Exactly right. And then they would have kept waiting, and then life probably would have gotten in the way and things get hard. And then suddenly they're down the road and they don't have any property, right? Okay, so that was number 1, right? A few numbers thrown out there. So I hope no one's too overwhelmed with it right now. I did say get the pen and paper. But we're now going to move on to option 2 or scenario 2, which is the sell down, which I know you always love talking about a sell down, don't you?
I do, mate. I think it's very interesting because I feel like for a lot of listeners as well that aren't kind of also at that retirement stage, I think it is also appealing to them, right?
Yeah.
Especially those active type investors that are kind of like, I want to see like what I can do actively to get the best possible outcome from the portfolio. Yeah. I know this podcast is all about, looking at the retirement scenario, but a lot of the listeners tuning in, I'm sure, are thinking about, if I buy a property and I see some really beneficial growth over, a 12, 48-month period, like if I feel like, after doing a market analysis that market's kind of petered out from a short-term growth perspective, does it make sense to look to potentially liquidate that asset and then repurpose those funds in a different growth market? So those kind of things. So that's why
I get it, matey. I get it. I personally, I'll say I don't like it. I love the idea of generational wealth, right? I love the idea of having something that sits there.
Yeah.
But the best part is, and that's the whole point of this episode, and I love the fact, I know you don't disagree with what I'm saying, and I don't disagree with what you're saying either, but I love it because this is one of the core things about property is that there are so many different ways to achieve it, right? Like different ways to cut the cake. And that is what's really shown out of this is you and I can both invest in property. You and I can both agree on the same types of properties and their value. But then as we get down the journey, we can take a different left and a different right turn. Yeah. But then we can actually still come back together at the end and be in the same position.
Sure.
Right? But it's about risk tolerance, timings, desires and all the rest, right? So let's have a look at this one. Okay. So what's really important to remember with this, and this one has a bit of a complicating factor, right? Is that when you go and sell down all your properties, you have to remember that your money, the sum that you're going to get at the end, is going to lose value over time, right? So you either need to have enough money at the very end of selling down your whole portfolio to adjust your let's say your annual drawings. Like let's say it was, $5 or $6 million that you needed to be able to draw whatever it is you need. That, we start with 125, but then when we go and add in inflation, next year that's 128. And then the year after that's 130 something, right? So when you go and adjust for all that, you need a much bigger sum of money if you're not planning to reinvest it into something, right? Now, the whole point of the sell down is that we're trying to remove things that we might think are complicated in our life, right? I would say that's typically a reason somebody goes, I want to sell it down because I don't want to have to deal with tenants. I don't have to deal with properties. I don't have to deal with this. I don't want to deal with that. Yeah. I just want to have my money sitting there and I can draw it when I want, right? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Right? Yep. So you need to either have a bigger sum of money when you do that so that you can account for that inflation adjustment each year on your drawdown, or you get a smaller sum of money and you go and invest it into something that is a lot more passive, right? Something that's like, inflation plus a couple of percent, for example, or whatever it might be. Because then, smaller sum of money, you obviously put it into something that is not giving you the same stress that owning a portfolio might. And I can appreciate it, right? Like if you do it right, there shouldn't be a lot of stress, but things happen, Yeah. So that's the whole idea, right? Now I can tell you for this scenario, right? We're going to end up buying a few properties, right? Not a crazy amount, but a few, right? But I can tell you that when we sell the portfolio with the way that this couple was set up in their time frame, it was going to be really challenging to get them to the number that was going to allow them to not have to reinvest that profit, right? Or the earnings from the portfolio, right? So they were going to have to take that and invest it into something, right? Now, what we did, and I want to make it clear, none of this is financial advice, right? It's always the case with our podcast, but none of it is, but especially this because we're now dabbling, talking about things like ETFs, so exchange traded funds or share market, things like that. We've gone and planned for them to go and take that big lump sum of money, put it into, a low cost, lower returning, but lower risk ETF. Think maybe something like bonds or something a little bit above bonds. And all we've had to account for is a 4% rate of return, right? And in all these scenarios, we've gone for a 3% inflation rate. So we're basically doing inflation plus 1, right? So nothing crazy. And that's the beauty of the scenario that I like, is that it's simple. We're not trying to, make it sound like something insane that only a few people can achieve, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a lot of preamble for this one, right? Just to set the tone, but let's jump into it now, okay? So we're going to start, same as we did with the buy and hold, with a 650K in January of this year and a 650K in October of this year, right? Because you remember, same couple, same scenario, right? Now, they want to go more aggressive. They're going to save more. They're going to do all the rest, right? And then this is where we start to, exactly as we were talking about in the last episode with Jeremy, we can look at things like different structures to help, ownership and borrowing and all the rest, right? Of course, it's got to be right for your circumstances and, primarily they serve other purposes, right? We're then going to now buy our next property in August 28, right? So we're going to do it about 3 years later, but that's different to the buy and hold where our next property was 4 years later. So you can already see we've brought it forward, not by a lot, but by 1 year, right? So 3 years later, we buy property 3 for $700K, and it's going to be in August 2028, right? So 3 years down the road, okay? We're then going to go for property number 4 2 years after that, right? So August 2030, and that's going to be for $700K, right? So as everyone can pick up, this was all planned out in August, right? So we just run off the August date, right? So now, August 2030 is here. We've now got 4 properties in our portfolio, right? These are all still foundation properties. Now, I can tell you that for the rest of our acquisitions, we're actually still in what we call foundation properties. And I'll tell you why. When we look at something like commercial, because of the differences in leverage and typically, a growth rate that can be a bit more conservative compared to residential, especially with the risk that you factor in to get whatever growth rate you do get, there actually wasn't a need when we were doing this to go into that. Because if you think about a sell down, you're trying to maximize your capital growth to sell down, right? You don't you're not too worried about the income side because you're going to sell it, right? So we've done 4 properties. August 2030, the 4th property was $700K, right? We now move on to property number 5, right? Which is $850K in August 2032, right? So again, 2 years later. So you can see every 2 years, right? The couple, they're on decent money. They've made it clear they're going to push themselves forward. They've made it clear they're going to save. They've made it clear that they want to sacrifice for 10 years to put themselves ahead for 40 years, right? So that's going to be for $850K, right? So a little bit of a tick up in that case.
Yeah.
But that's also because they want to now get some high, not the price necessarily means high quality, but they want to be open to more markets, right? And then finally, we get onto property number 6, okay? So only 6 properties, right? Which I know is a lot more than what most people have, but it's also not 15, right? So property number 6, this time it's 3 years ahead, right? So we've waited 2. Now we're going to wait 3, okay? And it's also going to be for $850K, right? So over 10 years, they're going to buy 6 properties, of which 2 of them were done in the first year. So really, you think over, we'll call it 9 years, they're going to buy 4 properties, right?
Yeah.
So a little bit more aggressive, but I wouldn't say crazy.
No, I don't think so at all. I think we also want to reiterate as well, because I know there's people probably tuning in thinking, well, how on earth am I actually going to have the serviceability to go up to 6 properties?
Yeah.
Right. That's, again, it ties into the whole finance strategy, the structuring strategy. That plays a massive role in how you expand as well.
And personal circumstances, right? You got to remember, they're on a $350K income at 35, right? It's not the most, they're not the richest, but they're not the poorest either, right? So you think they're going to have good earning potential to keep moving forward.
Yes.
Right.
But it's also compromises would have been made throughout the process as well. It's
of
like
course.
If they had to realize in year 2028 when they were looking to acquire their 3rd property, that they needed to upgrade their car and they wanted to drop, $150K on a new car, like new Porsche. Then
it's going to impact,
repercussions,
right? Exactly right. Okay. So that means the acquisition is done over 10 years, right? Now, what ends up happening is by the time we get to year 15, we allow 5 more years to compound out. And it's around year 14, year 15, actually. They only needed to get around $3.64 million, roughly, for them to be able to go at a 4% rate of return on their lower risk investment they put all their cash into. And that's going to, and also I don't think I said it before. We've modeled this all off the fact that they were going to go up to 85, right? Years of age, right? So in the first scenario, that meant they needed 30 years of income to be able to deal with that. But we obviously got it. We got it up right in that 20-year bucket.
Yeah.
In this scenario, because we've got to account for their age in the rate of return and things like that, we've obviously then accounted for 35 years, right? We've accounted for 35 years in this. So they hit it, right? That's the crux of it. Yeah. They end up hitting what they need to for that. And then they end up in a scenario where they actually have a whisker over the 125,000, but they've done it in 15 years, 14, 15 years. So they got sort of 5 to 6 years ahead of that buy and hold. But one of the key differentiators here is they now no longer have an asset base. Yeah. They have the money, and if they want to draw less, it's obviously going to last longer. But now if they want to have kids, you know, if they want to do anything else, if they live longer, you know, now they don't have that asset base to rely on.
True.
What do you think of that?
Yeah. I guess what kind of scenario would you typically expect someone to do this kind of sell down strategy?
Well, I think for me, one of the biggest things that comes about is, you know, where is your head at for future generations, right? If you don't have kids or you can't have kids or you don't plan to have kids or whatever it is, but the end result is like children aren't a factor.
Yeah, and you just want to enjoy the fruits of your labor. And
exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly right. Yeah. You know, for you, it doesn't really matter. You know, like maybe if you pass, you intend to give money to charity or, you know, your favorite niece or nephew or something. But ultimately, you know, for most people that have children as parents, their first thought is, I want to give my kids an easier life, right? So that's probably one of the biggest things.
Yeah.
I would say another one would be, even if you have that, maybe you're of the opinion, I want my kids to make it by themselves. Right? I'm not going to make their lives harder, but I don't want to gift them all this money. I don't want them to think they've got this to rely on.
Yeah.
So you want to enjoy your own life and you want to, you know, like you said, enjoy the fruits of your labor. And it's up to your children to make up what you want, you know, for themselves, right? So you might sell down, right? Or, you know, it could be for something else. You know, some people might decide property is only one of their means to an end and they just take out one portion and they don't want to hold it and they want to take their, you know, $3.6 million or whatever it is.
Yeah,
keep moving.
Yeah, so for me personally, I would say that my kind of style would be, if I am selling down, it's more of that active type of selling throughout the acquisition period to scale, as opposed to like towards the back end selling down and retiring. I don't know. I think it's just something about like you've worked hard acquiring to get to this point where you're just getting rid of them all kind of thing. Yeah. So, but for certain people, it would
for sure. And what you're talking about though, you're not talking like when you say that.
Yeah,
it's an important distinction for everyone to understand. That's not a sell down strategy. That's just making strategic changes in your portfolio as you're moving.
Yeah.
Like that is not a how to retire exit strategy because many people, as they're going through their journey, will or would sell assets to replace with other ones. But you can see the key distinction here is we're not making any replacement of assets. So you're not selling to do that in that case. So, you know, you and I are kind of aligned on that front, you know, of not wanting to see all your hard work go down the drain. Right?
Absolutely. And then, mate, we've got the last one.
Yes.
Which is a combination of the two.
A combination of the two. So, you know, in this case, this isn't 50-50, right? Or in any combination case, it's not necessarily 50-50 where you're going, I own 5 properties. Or 5 is hard to divide in 2, isn't it?
Yeah.
I got 6 properties. I'm going to keep 3. I'm going to sell 3, right? It's not necessarily about that. It's about looking at your portfolio, thinking about what's doing what for you and selling a portion and keeping a portion, right? Whatever that is, right? So, as it kind of suggests, and as we were just saying, right, it is that combination of the two strategies. And, you know, why might you want to do this? Well, it could be about the fact you want to take some money and put it in other things. It could be a case of, you know, you want to simplify your life, your finances, your portfolio. It could be a case of other things. I don't know. I could come up with more off the top of my head, but, you know, I'd say they're some of the most common ones.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. So, we're going to start off, right, in the combination. Same as the other two. We bought a $650K in Jan 2025, and we bought a $650K in October of 2025, right? So same. You can see there's similarities, right? Because a lot of property strategies, it doesn't matter. Your circumstances of today, doesn't matter what your goals are and all the rest. It's going to take a very similar flavor in your first couple of years, right? This is where we now have a slight change, right? And this is where it aligns a little bit more with the sell down strategy, right? So in the buy and hold, we bought property 3 for $700K in August 2029. In the combination, we're buying that same $700K property in August 2028, which is the same as the sell down. So instead of waiting 4 years, we're waiting 3. So you can see, same as the sell down in the combination, time often is not your friend, right? Because you're trying to smash growth as quick as you can. But in this case, you're also keeping an eye to income because you're not selling at all, right? So this is where combos can actually get a little bit more tricky to try to set up correctly, right? So we're at 3 properties by the time we get to August 2028, right? So 3 properties in 3 years, right? 2 in the first year and then 1 in the third year, right? Now we end up taking quite a big pause, right? We now go from 2028 and we actually fast forward to 2035, right? In 2035, the first thing that we're going to do is we're actually going to sell property number 1 to have funds for property number 4. And the reason we're doing that is because in the combo, we're keeping an eye towards debt.
Yeah.
So we're able to go and buy property number 4, which is that same commercial for $3 million with less debt.
Yeah.
Right? So it frees it up just that little bit more, add in all their savings, add in the borrowing they can do and all the rest, right? So we're in that position, right? So now we've sold 1 to replace 1. So we're actually now only sitting at 3 properties, right? But you've moved through 4 in your portfolio, right? So now we're going to jump forward to 2040, right? Which is 15 years into. We start in 2025. We now go forward 15 years. We're at 2040, right? In 2040, we're going to sell property number 2. So we sold property number 1 to help fund property 4, which was the commercial. And then we're left with property 2, 3, and 4, right? So 2 and 3 were foundations. 4 is the acceleration, which was a commercial. In 2040, we're going to sell property 2, which was a foundation. We're going to use that to clear the debt on property number 3. So property number 3 is now unencumbered. And we're going to use the excess funds to reduce, not clear, but reduce more debt
On the commercial.
on the commercial.
Yeah.
Right? So you think about it. I've already said it. The biggest expenses, which are the biggest things that impact your cash flow, is your mortgage repayments, right? So by clearing out debt and then reducing debt, and then you can go and refinance it if you want, right? Or you need to, we go refinance it. We're now at a point where the total debt on the portfolio drops to under 500K.
Yeah.
Right? So by the time we hit 2040, we make the sales, make the adjustments, we're actually going to end up having 143K at the 15-year mark. And we're going to have under 500K of debt. It's around 490K of total debt.
And only 2 properties.
Yeah. And so you still own, right? But you've also been able to, simplify a little bit of what's going on, right? Now, the risk is you've only got 2 properties. If something happens to one, 50% of your portfolio is impacted, right? You're also now at a point where if that commercial, which is a heavy lifter in that income scenario, if something happens to that commercial, your tenant goes, you can't replace, all the rest, you're going to have a huge amount of your income impacted, right? Compared to, say, if we take it back to the buy and hold, where if you lost the commercial in that one, right, and the commercial was still doing quite a chunk of heavy lifting, you've still got your 3 residential ones, right? Yeah. And your 3 resi ones would probably come pretty close to, I didn't actually look at the numbers, would probably come pretty close to servicing that debt if you had it vacant. So you might still need a job or be in a job, right?
Yeah.
Especially if you're still trying to de-risk and all the rest. But you're now in a position where you're not worried about paying that debt. And if you're around 55, 60, something like that in scenario 1 of the buy and hold, you might have access to your super as well at that point.
Yeah,
so
exactly
you go,
right.
well, the resis, properties 1 through 3 in the buy and hold can offset the debt I've now got to carry because there's no tenant in my commercial and property 4. So now it's just kind of neutral while we get the new tenant. And I can just draw a little bit from my super to be my living expenses. We get someone back in the commercial and boom, my income's straight back up to 120 or what was it, 136K per annum, right? But coming back to the combination, we achieve 143K within 15 years. So you actually end up with the biggest result. But I would certainly make the argument, and I would, I actually think it could be the more risky one for exactly what we were talking about. right?
Yeah, I would tend to agree. It really comes down to what you're looking for, right? Because at face value, you're like, well, you're getting the most amount of cash flow in the shortest period of time using the combination approach.
Yeah.
But when you compare it to like the buy and hold, well, you've got more capital in the market, you've got that compounding growth effect that's there, and then versing the sell down strategy where you're liquidating everything, you don't have any more you don't have any capital growth prospects.
Yeah.
Unless you're kind of like investing in the low cost ETF where you're probably only really beating inflation by a couple of percent.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting. But based on those three, like combination is definitely the riskiest. But from a, I guess, performance perspective, I kind of feel like sell down is like the one that I would probably lean the furthest away from.
Right, from those numbers, I'd agree with you. I'd agree with you, right? Like, and like you said, it's all about what somebody wants, right? Like for me, if I've already made it to 50, right? You think about what a 50-year-old looks like and is professionally today compared to what a 50-year-old was in, say, the early 2000s. Yeah. Very different, right? Very different, right? People are working later. You know, there's not as much stigma about people, you know, who are 50 trying to find a job, things like that, right?
Yeah.
Very different world, right? And everyone wants to retire early. That's great. But if it was a case of, okay, I could be retired at 50 with my 125, but I've liquidated all my assets. I've got cash left, but it's now sort of just there and sort of doing that.
Yeah.
Versus work another 5 years and I retain 4 properties and all the rest. I'm probably going with that, right?
Yeah.
And then you cover the combo and you go, you get more, you get it faster, but you now do carry a chunk of risk, right? And, you know, it's important to say there is no reason why in this scenario they couldn't do that, clear it out, go buy other or more property, right? But the point is to obviously have an end result for this scenario analysis.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. For me, I look at it and I go, to me, in that circumstance, the buy and hold makes the most sense because even though you take a touch longer, you get a better balance.
I agree with you.
Would you agree?
Yeah. And then you've also got that safety net of the super as well, where you can look to draw on that.
Well, that's it.
At some point as well to help balance it all out.
And you think if somebody's 35, their entire working life, they'll have had superannuation. If they're a 350K household, right? I mean, like that's not a small sum of money that's coming in. I mean, we're at what, 12% super. I'm trying to do the maths on the fly. I mean, 35,000 is 10%, 3.5, 7. So you're talking about 42,000 a year going into your super from contributions, let alone your returns in the market. I mean, even if you go 20 years and you don't get a single return, I'm literally just trying to do this maths on the fly here. What I say it was 42. So that's 420. That's 840. That's 840,000 in super over that same period. Add in an investment return, not too bad, right? Like, what is it they say? If you got 7%, you double every 10 years. So, you know, you're talking about, you know, I'm trying to do the maths here quickly. You're talking about approaching probably $2 million worth of or a bit less. Around, you know, 1.5 mil, 2 mil, something like that. Someone's going to do the maths and send us an email and say, mate, you're so off the ball. Me trying to do the compounding in my head. But, you know, you're going to end up with a decent chunk out of your super as well.
Yeah.
And that's not even included, as you said.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, mate, thank you for crunching the numbers. I know, like, for those of you that don't know Lachlan, like, he's a social butterfly. He carries himself very well. But, you know, like, if you saw what I saw, sometimes he's in that dark room just kind of with the calculator, crunching the numbers all by himself.
A bit nerdy behind the numbers, hey.
Yeah. But like, no, you've done really well. And I hope a lot of the listeners were able to keep up because a lot of numbers were getting thrown around there. But I think that articulated the differences between the different approaches. So I guess to kind of tie this all together then really brings it back to the point of how important having a portfolio plan is and being able to review and adjust that plan as time goes on.
Yeah. I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that you've hit the nail on the head that for me, the single most important thing I want people to take away from this of what they can do today to put themselves in the best position is understand the importance of that portfolio plan, right? You know, if you don't have one, which is the vast majority of people, right? Like you think about the scenarios we just ran, that's all done on our modeling platform, right? So if you come work with us as a client, we do that for you. You know, we plan that out. But if you don't have the right strategy, and you can see there was certainly some similarities, key similarities between all three. However, changing even just 12 months of when you make a purchase, changing when you go, you know, when you duck, when you should have weaved, you know, like all of that has an impact on what your end result is. And if you don't know how to plan it all out, and I think probably most importantly, there's a difference between writing it out on paper versus actually practically being able to execute it. And like, we can do it because we do it every day, right? Like, but if you're just an individual, you're like, oh, I can whip it up on Excel, that's fine. But you might not actually know and understand what is truly possible and how to execute on it, right? So for me, the first thing is the impact, the impact and the importance of that portfolio plan. And you need to get it done. You need to have one if you're buying property, right? So, like I said, that's what we do, right? And then the second part is reviewing where you are today to understand if you are on track for what your plan is, right? Because I'm now making the assumption you got your plan, right? Are you on track and aligned with what you need to be doing? Because it could be a case of you did your plan a few years ago. You're now today, what you want has now changed. Maybe you were young, you were hungry, you maybe a little bit dumb, and you were like, I want to settle down. I don't care. I'm not going to have kids. I don't have a partner, whatever, keep going. And now, 5 years later, maybe you've got kids and a partner and you're going, oh man, I want a bit of generational wealth. I love this kid. I want that, right? So making those adjustments and being there, but you got to review it and then also aligning your properties in your portfolio with what it is they're trying to achieve. Because you heard it. In all those plans, each property had a purpose, right? And we didn't even go through all of it. It was mainly in the combo one that we were talking about it. But if you heard me talking about it in the combination one, you can imagine the thought and effort that goes into planning those subsequent properties in the other versions of the plan. Yeah. I just didn't want to bore everyone with it, So that's what I take away from it, right? Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, no, mate, I love the episode. I think it was really good. Like, I just feel like there would be some listeners where when we speak about the numbers, a lot of it probably went over some of their heads. So I think come back to the episode, bring the pen and paper, make sure you're jotting things down. Mate, that's episode 11. I think we're coming up to the last episode of the series. Yeah, next month.
Yeah.
What have we got in store for that final episode, mate? What do you think?
I reckon it could be something cool. Maybe it's not. I think we just got to leave it out as a little bit of a tease and let people see what's going on. Yeah. But, I think, hopefully everyone's really enjoyed the series so far. Maybe we'll be back for season 2. Maybe we won't. Who knows? We'll have to watch this space, right? But, for me, as I said right at the start of this episode, this year or this last 12 months of doing this has been all about taking people on the journey so they can understand and highlight for people where they might be, having a few gaps in their own knowledge that they can increase, or also identifying if it's not within your capabilities. And that's not because you're not smart or you're not good at what you do. If you're a lawyer, why are you going to know about all this? If you're a school teacher, why are you going to know about all this and how to do it? And that's what this has all been about. And that's why I thought for this episode, how to retire through property was a really nice one to put at the back of the series to tie it all together.
Awesome.
Well, thanks for tuning in, everybody. We'll be back shortly for our next episode. But if you're looking for help for building or scaling your property portfolio, you have to come and have a chat with me, Lukey, and the rest of the team at Atlas Property Group, right? We're here to help. We're going to be on Channel 9 very shortly, giving that investment advice. So if you want to be around the people who know what they're doing, come and have a chat with us because we're the people that you wish you worked with sooner.
The information featured in this podcast is general in nature and does not take into consideration your financial situation or individual needs and should not be relied upon. Before making any investment, insurance, tax, property, or financial planning decision, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you. Guests appearing on this podcast may have a commercial relationship with the companies mentioned.